Hello, my name's Vicky Leaning and I'd like to welcome you to the very first video from A Very English Craft Room. Today we're going to look at some scrapbooking. Today we're going to do a scrapbook page using For the Love of Pretty Paper's Yummy Yellows challenge with the extra prompt of yellow circles. I've titled mine Bloomin Lockdown as it's about the flowers that were growing in the first lockdown of COVID-19. I will be scrapbooking some pictures that I took whilst walking in the park during the first lockdown. I printed some of the photographs out on my Canon Selfie in the smaller version, and then I cut them out into circles because I wanted to mount them onto the yellow circles that was the extra prompt from this challenge. To cut the photos into circles, I used a compass with a blade on that I got from the works a number of years ago. The blade had been used quite a number of times and actually was a little bit blunt, so in the end it just ended up sort of giving me the image of the circle, which then I still had to cut out using the scissors. However, at least it gave me a start. Later on I did change the blade to cut out some of the cardstock circles that I needed for this project. I've been scrapbooking for a number of years and it was my mum that got me into it in the first place. And now my daughter has also made a start into doing some scrapbooking. I'm a mum of 2 grown-up children and I've been working for the NHS on and off since I qualified as a nurse back in the 1990s. I've been crafting for as long as I can remember. I enjoy knitting, sewing, crocheting. I've made dance costumes, bridesmaids' dresses, and some clothes for myself for when I go on cruises and for every day. Although currently I seem to be doing more scrapbooking than anything else. So here I've been cutting out the circles to mount the photos on, and here I'm using a distress tool to rough up the edges of some of the circles just to give a little bit of texture to the finished layout. This I got off eBay, but I believe you can get them from many of the craft shops. So here I'm cutting out the petals for the flowers. The photos are going to be the centres of the flowers. The finished layout will have a very sort of naive look to it, almost like a child's painting of flowers. This is actually quite a different layout for me. Normally mine are a little bit more formal than this. However, I've been taking part in some online challenges and watching some other people's YouTube channels, and this has influenced me to have a go at doing some other things a little bit differently. Comment below as to where you get your ideas for your layouts from. Now I've finished cutting out all the elements that for the flowers, I'm going on to prep the paper because I'm going to do a mixed media background. So first of all I'm going to use some transparent or clear gesso. This helps to protect the paper from the water in the paints or the inks that I'm going to use. I'm painting this on using a silicone makeup brush. These are easily available from Amazon and eBay and many other places. If you don't use gesso to prepare your paper, it can end up with the paper being a big soggy mess and buckling up quite a lot. You will still get some buckling or ruttling up of the paper using any sort of wet product on your paper, but this really does help a lot to prevent it. This pot of gesso I got from the range. But again, a lot of the bigger craft shops will stock gesso, and you can get this either in the shop itself or online. So I'm just smoothing it out a little. However, you can see that it's starting to drag as it dries a little, so that's my prompt to stop messing about with it. So at this point I had to pop out and do some shopping, so it was an ideal time to let this sit and dry on its own before I came back to add some of the inks and paints to make the background. So here I'm using ink pads that you would use if you were using stamps. However, I'm just applying it straight onto the paper. So this one here is a distress ink from Tim Holtz, Salty Oceans, and the other smaller one that I'm using there, and again the other smaller ones I'll be using in a second, are from a set from Hobbycraft. So now I'm going to spray some water on top of those inks. and this allows the inks then to run and mix across the paper. You will see where the gesso is, it runs and mixes quite freely and doesn't actually sink into the paper. However, where the gesso isn't, the ink immediately sinks into the paper, leaving a sort of darker stained, harder line. The gesso just allows you to play with the inks and get a softer effect before it dries. So I'm just using a brush here just to mix the paint a little bit more, and now I'm using some Nuvo mists here just to give a little bit extra shimmer and spray. However, it was a little bit dried and sprayed across the paper as I did it, so it gave a little bit of a blotchy effect. So adding a little bit more now, and then I'm going to just mix those in a little bit. It'll add a little bit of a shine and a shimmer, but not too much. So I'm trying to mix in the little dried bits, however they don't mix in completely at this point. You'll see I got a bit where I didn't really want it, however that will soon get covered up with the green. So here I am putting one layer of green on and then changing colour and putting a different type of green on, and hopefully these will mix then to give a nice background for the flowers. Up until recently I haven't really used a lot of white cardstock. However, since I've discovered gesso and mixed media, I seem to be using a lot more of it now, and I'm quite enjoying making my own background papers. See here, now I've spritzed some more water on, the green inks are mixing, however there's a little bit too much water there, so I'm just blotting some of it up using just some ordinary kitchen roll, and then I can allow what's left to run again to create the colour that I'm wanting. So again, just blotting up a little bit more because there was more there than I really needed. And at this point we're nearly there with the background. So you'll see that's lifted a lot of the paint, and because of the gesso it's not sunk in. So I'm just mixing it in a little bit more just to cover the bits that were still white, and still trying to mix in those spots. So now I'm going to freehand cut some grass for the bottom of the paper while the background is starting to dry. It's not so wet that I can't lay other stuff on top of it, but it is still too damp to start sticking anything down. Talking of sticking things down, sometimes the gesso does make it harder for you to actually stick your items onto the paper, so you may need a stronger adhesive or a little bit more tape than normal. So I'm going to cut some grass out of 3 different colour green cardstocks. These are just leftovers that I had from previous projects. I like to keep them in a folder with one of those ones with the individual plastic pockets, and each plastic pocket will have a different colour paper in it, and it just makes it easier then for me to find a little scrap of this or a little scrap of that rather than having to root through a box as I used to do. Most of my scrapbooking in the past has actually been from holidays, particularly cruises. However, recently with the challenges and with having more time due to COVID, being at home more frequently, I have started to scrap older photographs and other things that happen just in daily life as well as days out. Let me know if you have a favourite subject to scrapbook. So here I am using a heat tool just to get rid of the last of the moisture on the paper. I find that actually as you're drying it on the front, the moisture appears on the back or indeed on my cutting board, so I like to pick it up and blow dry back and front. So now we've got all the elements cut out and prepared, we can start producing the actual layout. So I'm just inking the edges of this circle, which is going to become the sun in the paper. This just helps it stand out from the background a little bit more. I've started using glue as well as tape for some of my scrapbooking projects. Sometimes it's just easier with the gesso to use glue rather than the tape, but it varies from one item to another and from one layout to another. So here we go with some of the yellow circles, which were the prompts for this layout, and then I'm going to stick the petals in as well as we go round. This took quite a lot of time and I ended up with quite a lot of glue on my fingers, which I had to pick off before filming anymore because they really did not look very nice. I find it very hard to actually do any crafting without getting my fingers in a mess. So more petals going down under the circle. Again, by using the wet glue, it allows you a little time to manoeuvre and get things underneath, which sometimes when you've taped it down, it doesn't. So quite a lot of petals for this this layout. Oh, and a stem for this particular flower. All of this was cut freehand, other than the circles, using scraps of card or paper. At this stage I was liking the background, the painted or inked section, but really wasn't quite sure how the rest of this was going to come along and whether I liked it or not. So here you can see me pulling up the edges and just roughing them up a little bit and bending them again, just to give a little bit of texture to the layout. It helps to create a little bit of shadow and depth to the picture. So while I was sticking the petals down on these flowers, it suddenly came to me that it reminded me of the television programme The Good Life, which myself and my husband have been watching some reruns on the television recently. So again, here I am, roughing up some of the edges, distressing it with the distress tool. It has a series of blades in that little round part, which just say take the edge off and give it a little rough edge. Sometimes it rips and tears it depending on the papers and what sort of effect you want. For something that started out as quite a simple idea, this layout became quite complex and actually took quite a long time to actually finish it. I had to leave it a few times in between just because of having to go and do other things and letting it dry. So here you can see I'm trying to put the white petals in underneath the yellow flower. It probably would have been better if I'd done that one before the yellow one that sat at the front. This layout actually used quite a lot of scrap cardstock that I'd had hanging around for a while. However, I do still have quite a lot more. I'm lucky enough to have my own craft room, and I have filled it with a lot of craft stuff. Indeed, they say there are two hobbies related to craft. The first is actually doing the craft itself. The second is building up your stash. I am trying to actually use up more of my stash than I actually buy more to replace. However, sometimes that is quite difficult. It always seems to be calling out to you whenever you go anywhere near a craft shop, and I'm sure many of you will agree with me. So now finally I'm getting around to sticking the photographs onto the layout. Here I am using double-sided tape. Here you'll see I've got a little gadget for smoothing down the tape and then helping me pick the backing of the tape off rather than trying to pick at it with my nails. This actually is from a dental kit from the pound shop, which had a toothbrush and a mirror and all sorts in it, so for less than £1 it's been pretty good. I've had this one on the go for a number of years, so money well spent, I think. It's always worth keeping your eyes open in non-craft shops for things that you might be able to use for your craft hobbies. And if we can save a few pennies, that's even better. So here I'm using the same tool to score a line down the centre of the leaf so that I can bend it. So it's a little curvy line just to give some shape to the leaf when I stick it on the layout. So you can see I'm just folding it along the crease that I'd made. This tool also gets used for unbunging the ends of glue and glitter glues, etc. It's a pretty good tool all along. However, when I discovered that as well as drawing the line onto the leaf, I could actually use the same pen I was drawing with to do the scoring for the fold, so that was even better. So by this stage I haven't actually used any commercially bought embellishments, although I will use a few towards the end. Everything so far has been from scraps of cardstock or photographs I've already taken. So I'm just bending up the leaves and the petals just again to give a little bit of dimension. I know that these will flatten down a little once they go into the album, but it's nice when you start for them to have a little bit of dimension there. So again, using the double-sided tape to stick the leaves on just a little bit, you don't need a lot. I apologise if you notice that one hand's nails are longer than the other. However, I've been playing the guitar, and for that the left hand my nails had to be quite short, so and the right hand need to be a little bit longer to be able to pluck at the strings. When scrapbooking in my craft room, I like to listen to a little bit of music. And occasionally I'll listen to an audiobook whilst doing this. Comment below what you like to do whilst you're scrapbooking. Do you sit in silence? Do you listen to some music? Have a television on? I don't know about you, but I find that crafting also helps prevent me from snacking when I don't really need to, because it keeps my hands busy. Talking of keeping my hands busy, you'll see that firstly I use my nails to produce a curl on the paper, but then I remembered that when you're trying to curl gift ribbon, they always say you should use a pair of scissors to produce that curl. So then I utilised that tip to produce the curl on the grass on the bits of paper here. So nearly done with sticking down all the bits of paper that I'd cut out, just one last little bit of grass here. And now I'm popping down the alphas that I've chosen for the title. So the title I've chosen for this is Blooming Lockdown, as a bit of a play on words with the word blooming for the flowers that were blooming during lockdown. So these green shiny alphas are thickers from American Crafts, and it's called Sunny, which I suppose was quite apt for this picture. The second set of alphas that I'm going to use in the second are actually a chipboard ones, the ones you can see there with the word lockdown, that I've had for quite a while, so I'm not really sure where they came from because I've thrown away the packaging, because I've used them before and the packaging always seems to get ripped, so they tend to go back into the box just as they are. Both sets of alphas actually are sticking down reasonably well, and this is because they're going down onto the cardstock or paper rather than onto an area that's had the gesso, which often with anything sticky like the chipboard letters and the alphas there, you sometimes have to use a bit of glue if you're sticking them down onto an area that's had gesso on it. More so I find when I'm using white gesso rather than the transparent, because it tends to be a little bit more chalky. So now I'm looking to see if I can find an exclamation mark just to finish off this title. So it's a little bit fiddly, but we get there in the end. I had originally planned on putting the title up at the top of the picture on the bit that's like the sky. However, it just seemed to sit better down in the grass there. And actually I end up using the sky for the journaling a bit later. So here I am using some little googly eyes, which I actually bought to do for some pages to do with Turkey. You will see a lot of blue eye decorations in Turkey, and indeed some other areas around the Mediterranean. And this is because they believe that the blue eye wards off the evil. So I decided that this sun needed a big smiley face, so I'm just using a very fine black tip pen. Or even a very fine tipped black pen. So those blue googly eyes were the first of the actual purchased or shop bought embellishments that I used on this layout. So now you can see I've got various bugs and insects, butterflies and things going down on the layout. These have come from various different places. Some have come from the pound shop, some have come from craft fairs, some from eBay, and some that I've had lurking around for a very, very long time. So I was going to stick this little ladybug down here, however, I didn't like it there. I wanted to put the snail over there, so it took a little bit of peeling off, so I had to do that very, very gently. So now little snail goes here, and that's especially for my daughter, who loves snails and actually has some as pets. Well, one is her pet, and one she's looking after for the nursery she works at, because they have a snail there as a pet too. So now I'm looking at the placement of a few brads. These are shapes of bumblebees, and I thought they were ideal for this layout. I haven't used brads in a number of layouts, which is really unusual for me. In fact, at the scrapbooking group that I go to when we're not in national lockdown, I'm known as the brad queen. This is because I have loads of brads and I use them on most of my layouts, and if anybody wants some brads, usually I've got some with me. So as part of the set of some little chipboard stickers that were ladybirds and insects and things, there were some little phrases, and this one here says cute as a bug. So I thought maybe I could find somewhere to put it, and it seemed to fit quite nicely, sat there nestled in on top of lockdown and nestled into the grass. You'll see on the lower of the two yellow flowers I've perched a little white bird. This again reminded me of the TV programme The Good Life, where the bird actually pecked the petals off, or so it appeared as it was flying round. So now I'm punching a little hole with exactly the same tools I've used for loads of things to pop the brads through, and then again I use it to help open it out, because sometimes they can be quite difficult and it's no good for your nails. So this really does help. So just a couple more brads to fasten into the paper, and that'll be the last of the purchased embellishments to go on for now. There will be a little bit more decoration going on in a second that will take a little bit of time. So again, these brads would have come from eBay. It's not something that you see for sale a lot nowadays. They seem to go in and out of fashion. So when I see them, I often buy them up. So I've got quite a store really. I even have some that are the shapes of eggs, bacon and knives and forks, which I'm sure I will find a layout for eventually. So I thought that was the last of the shop bought embellishments. However, a pot fell off the shelf above me and landed in the middle of the layout, and it contained these little shiny flowers that I had used in some dance costume in the past. So maybe they were saying they really wanted to be used. So now for the bit that actually took quite a bit of time. I decided I was going to sew some sun rays onto the background here, using a thicker heavy duty sort of thread that is slightly multicoloured, red, orange and yellow. This gave a little bit of variation to the sun rays. So I started out thinking I would be able to do this freehand. However, within doing a couple of stitches I changed my mind, as you'll see in a second. Although I had knotted the thread, I also decided to tape it down as well, just for some added security, because I didn't want it ripping through the paper. So as you can see, I'd done one stitch and I thought, no, I better pencil in some guidelines just in case. So here we are, using a pencil that I had checked could be rubbed out if needed. However, the stitching covered up the lines, so I didn't need to. So before stitching anymore, I decided I would punch holes along those lines, and it would just make my life easier and make sure the stitches were slightly more even than they might have been. Towards the end, I did apply some more tape to the back across where some of the stitching was, and also across the backs of the brads, because sometimes when you are putting your layouts into the plastic page protectors, they can catch, and sometimes that can cause the paper to rip if you're not careful. So it's always worth taking these little extra steps and taking a little bit extra time just to protect your work, because sometimes you do take a lot of time doing these pages. For anyone who's interested, the thread I'm using here is Gutterman Sulky in colour 4006. Which is 100% cotton, and like I say, it's variegated, going through reds, yellows and oranges, and looking at it now, a little bit of green in places. So after finishing doing the stitching, I found this washi tape that had got smile and hello written on it in the same shade of blue as the background, and then the writing was in white. So I thought maybe a little bit of tone on tone, particularly as I was going to do white writing for the journaling on the blue background. So here you can see I've got my T-square, just to make sure that when I start my journaling I start it nice and straight, because otherwise I have a tendency to go off at a bit of an angle. So here I made a mistake when doing the writing. However, the joy of having used the gesso is I can use a little bit of water, which then liquefies the ink that I'd used as the background and will cover the mistake. So that will dry eventually, so then I could carry on and continue writing my journaling across the sky there. Journaling is a new thing for me. I never really liked the look of my handwriting, so I never bothered. However, it's always nice for people who are going to look back at these layouts in future generations to see your handwriting, whether it be good or bad. So now this layout is finished, and I'll just let you have another last look at it. If you've enjoyed this first video of mine, please click on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. My second video for scrapbooking will have a Halloween theme, and hopefully this should be uploaded very soon. I am also going to be producing some videos for some simple Christmas decorations that you can do yourself, or maybe involve the children in, particularly in times of lockdown when maybe we need to entertain them. The items I've used to make those Christmas decorations are all easily purchased online. I used white to do the journaling here because I didn't want it to stand out too much, but I still wanted it to be on show rather than hidden behind some of the other elements, as I have done in some of my previous layouts. So here we are, just scanning round the picture so you can see the little individual flowers and the different dimensions created by the curling of the paper on the petals and the grass and the leaves there, and again the little snail hiding there in the grass. So all that's left now is for me to say thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you come back again soon to a very English craft room.